Well, welcome back. As you notice, my Vanna White is not here to make me look good. So she's taking a seat for this presentation. Right now we're going to talk about protecting the leader's marriage. And this is really for anyone, even if you're not currently a leader, because we all need to protect our marriage and be proactive. And we're deviating a little from the book right now. Our next session after lunch, we will delve into chapter 1, but we want to lay some groundwork. And I think it's really important that we understand that we need to protect our marriage, and we need to be proactive about that. Again, our theme scripture is Matthew 7:24, a wise man builds his house on the rock. That rock is Jesus Christ. We have to have that solid foundation for our marriage. Pastors and leaders have a lot of demands. In fact, life is demanding these days. And often I hear, maybe we should go back to the old days when life was simpler. Anybody say that? But you know what? Life wasn't simpler. When we were in the agricultural age, guess what? If we didn't work the fields, we didn't eat. We came off the farms, like my grandfather got off the farm, became a mechanic during World War I, and moved into the industrial age, and he had spent a lot of time struggling to make ends meet. And so whether we're in leadership, pastors, the good old days of the past, we all have struggles. There's always demands on us. 1 Timothy 3:1-3 is really the basis for what we're talking about in this session. If anyone sets his heart on being an overseer, he desires a noble task. Now the overseer must be above reproach, the husband of but one wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. The husband of one wife, above reproach. We have to take care of our marriage first. During our break, we started talking about this, and we have to realize, as we talked about in our first session, the marriage has to come first. We were talking about some leaders and whose marriages have failed, and whose fault is that? There isn't a fault. I mean, it's both of them. But at the same token, what is more important? And as we saw in our first session, the marriage relationship is supposed to be representative of the very nature of God. And so when we look at that, when we look at the responsibility we have as being an earthly representation of the very nature of who God is, our marriage has to come first, even before ministry. Carmen pointed out that there are those pastors who are committing fornication with brick and mortar, with their congregation. We were at a conference one time in a denominational conference. I won't tell you what denomination it was, but there was a church architecture firm in the booth next to us, and they had these pictures of these beautiful churches, and I was standing on the edge of our booth right next to that booth, and this pastor walked up, and he's standing in front of their booth with his arms crossed, and he says, "Now, that's what I'm dreaming about." And he kind of glanced over at me and thought I was part of that booth and said, "What's the biggest church you've built?" And I said, "Don't build churches, I build marriages." And he turned around and walked off. It broke my heart because he's viewing a building as more important than his married relationship. And, is that a judgmental statement? Sure. But you know, to not even say anything about that. He's dreaming about a building, and it's like, oh yeah, you know, marriage is important too. We didn't get that, and so it's sad. We have to realize that there are a lot of demands. Being a pastor, really, any marriage relationship, it's a never-ending work. You know, we experience that in our ministry. It's never-ending. There's always something. Taking care of grandkids. Yesterday, my mother had some problems. We had to deal with that. You know, life is never-ending. And so we have to have healthy boundaries in our lives when it comes to those demands. There's unrelenting pressure. Pastors experience a pressure that is just amazing to me. We were able to house a pastor for a pastor's conference here in Phoenix one time. A pastor and his wife came from Mexico to attend this pastor's conference. We provided housing for them. They told us it was the first time in 5 years they had had a day off. What a travesty that you would go 5 days of ministering every single day of your life. And to get some time off, they go to a pastor's conference and they're working more. So we made a point, we took them bowling, we took them different places in between to have some fun amidst their work. There's a collision of family and ministry needs. And again, this applies to any of us. We have needs of our extended family, we have needs of our job, our career, things that have to do around the house. There's going to be collisions with the needs of our spouse, our family. And what are we going to do about that? Are we going to take care of what is important? Or are we going to, you know, what is going to be most important to us? There's high expectations. There's huge expectations on pastors and leaders. Really on all of us, we have these huge expectations in our lives, and we have to realize that we've got to find that balance. We have to have those healthy boundaries. There's no wonder that the pastor divorce rate, even as pastors, is 40 to 50%. Pastor of a church we attended for the past couple of years, I don't know if they're divorced, but they're separated. He committed adultery, wasn't giving up the relationship, and was asked to leave. They put him in front of the congregation and said, well, they didn't put him up there, but put it in front of the congregation and said he's been asked to leave. It's terrible pressure that we expect. Look at this. Pastors are expected to have the wisdom of Solomon, the diplomacy of Daniel, the courage of David, the integrity of Joseph, the patience of Job, the strength of Samson, and the endurance of Moses. Isn't that what we expect of our pastors? And for desiring to go into leadership, you have to realize people are going to just kind of naturally have this expectation of you. And so there's no wonder that 40% of pastors are leaving the ministry. Someone told me recently that there's a pastor a day or more leaving the pastorate. And because there's these tremendous demands, but I think more than that, it's because we're not setting healthy boundaries. We're not taking care of the needful things. So what is your first calling? 1 Timothy 3, 4, 5 says, that he, the bishop or the leader, must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him with proper respect. If anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of the church? And so we have to be able to be that spiritual leader in our family first. We have to take care of our home front first. We were just talking during the break, and as Carmen and I entered full-time ministry almost 10 years ago, it was a huge adjustment for us. I had spent 30 years in telecommunications, driving off to work every day, coming home, and now all of a sudden we're working together. We're working at home, and we're together 24/7, and it was not an easy transition for us. And so we had to make this transition, figure out how everything's going to work, and it was to a point where I actually thought that I was going to have to walk away from the ministry because I was not going to lose my marriage to do marriage ministry. And it's like, Lord, if I can't get this right, then I gotta go find a job because I can't do this ministry and lose my own marriage. And so again, we have to realize that just as we see the nature of God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, we see the marriage relationship, husband, wife, and children, and then the church, Christ, the leaders, and the flock. And so there is, again, that representation of God in our marriage relationship. And it's an enormous responsibility, folks. I cannot get through to you enough. I don't know how to do that, to tell you that our marriage relationship should be reflecting God's unity, God's community, God's oneness, and we should have that in our marriage relationship. We should be presenting to the world who God is through our relationship. And if we're arguing, if we're treating each other with disrespect and not honoring one another, not working together as a team, then we're not representing God well. And that's what he calls us to do. I like this. This is a sandcastle my granddaughter and I built once upon a time, but Luke 6:49 says that a man built a house on the ground without a foundation. And so the moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete. Now my granddaughter was fairly dismayed that her sandcastle got wiped out by the waves, but look at what Jesus is talking about. If we don't build on that firm foundation, if we don't have that strong foundation, the storm's going to hit and it's going to be wiped out. Just as we talked about last hour, that financial crisis a few years ago, it revealed houses built on sand, families built on sand, marriages built on sand, rather than on the rock of Jesus Christ, rather than having that firm foundation. It wasn't a matter of just them experiencing the financial problems causing the difficulty in the marriage. They didn't have that foundation. The storm hit and it completely wiped them out. And so we see that's what happens in divorce. Someone defined divorce for me one time as one or both partners giving up. And we aren't, as we talked about, we're not to give up. We have got to build on a solid foundation. Luke 6:48 says, a man built a house, dug down deep, and laid the foundation on rock. When the flood came and the torrent struck, that house could not shake, or did not shake, because it was well built. And so when we're built on that foundation of Jesus Christ, when our home is built on that commitment we're going to have that firm foundation. We're going to have that strength in which to be able to minister, to be able to lead a church, to do what God's called us to do, because we have that strong foundation. And it's not only on Jesus Christ, but it's that foundation together. Having the commitment, having the honor and the love amongst our spouse. Timothy Keller wrote a book, drawing a blank, it's Why Marriage Matters. Yeah, that's not it. If anybody wants to know, I'll find it. In fact, baby, would you take a look and see if you have Tim Keller's book on the shelf. Tim Keller says 3 things happen when we get married. One, we realize that our spouse is selfish. And then we find out that our spouse is pointing out our selfishness. And then the third thing we discover is that their selfishness is worse than our selfishness. And too often we're off to the races, and many couples never get past that adjustment stage. They're arguing and fighting about their selfishness until they either die or they give up. And it doesn't have to be that way. We have to protect our marriage. So what do we do to protect our marriage? It is necessary to protect the marriage and the relationship. And we have to be proactive. Our whole idea of fortifying marriages, the castle, is being proactive to protect our marriage. They built castles to protect the people within it. The castle that we had with a picture of our family, that's Carcassonne in southern France, and it's not actually a castle, it's a fortified town. And they built these walls in the 1200s around the whole town to protect the inhabitants, to protect the town. And we have to do that same thing in our marriage relationship. The marriage relationship comes before relationships with other people. Too often, pastors end up ministering to other people. People end up doing things for other people rather than taking care of their spouse. I have the gift of giving, and one of the things that would happen, well, gift of giving, but also the gift of service. And if somebody called me up and needed help, guess what? I'm there. And so it got to a point where my wife is like, you know, are you broken? Do you have this innate need to be needed? Why do you know, I'm here, you're not taking care of me, but you're taking care of everybody else. And so we used to argue about that. And it's not until I realized my wife is most important, she has to be taken care of first, then I can minister to the others. And so it's not a matter of pointing fingers at our spouse, because as my pastor used to say, my first pastor, when you're pointing a finger at somebody, you got 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. And so it's not looking at what is our responsibility, what am I doing to or not doing to protect my marriage. And so, yeah, I need to exercise my gift. I need to be available to help people, but I need to take care of my spouse first. And we have to protect against all intruders. It can be work, hobbies, television, outside interests, family. Our extended family can cause problems, physical or emotional adultery. Even children are ministered. We had a couple we ministered to many years ago, and she actually told us, you know what, my children come first. He's a big boy, he can take care of himself. And it broke my heart. It's like, no, that's not biblical. Your husband comes first. If you have a solid marriage, then your children are going to be taken care of. And so, yes, my wife's holding up a note saying social media. Today, social media is causing problems. In fact, my mentor, his wife found an old flame on Facebook and ended up running off with him after 25 years of marriage. We have to be proactive about protecting our marriage from all areas. If ministry destroys our marriage, I mean, what good is it, our ministry? I related during the break, someone had given me a biography of, they said, oh, you got to read this biography. It was a great man of God. He was a contemporary of Billy Graham, started ministry during World War II, and developed a great ministry, traveled the world, preached the gospel around the world when it wasn't easy to fly around the world. And when I gave back the biography, I asked him, where are his children? And he said, well, I think one of his grandsons has accepted the Lord. His 4 children didn't know the Lord because they didn't have their father. He didn't take care of his home front. Paul expresses this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 when he says, I wish you were all like me, which single, unencumbered, totally sold out to the Lord. If the Lord told him to go to Macedonia, he could go to Macedonia. If he said go to Spain, he could go to Spain. I would like to go to Latin America. I could move there tomorrow. I think I've got my passport with me. I could be there tomorrow. But you know what? It doesn't work for my wife. We have 6 grandkids, 2 great-grandchildren in Phoenix, and we're not moving to Latin America. Does that limit me on my ministry? No. But it changes the focus of my ministry. And so my ministry is centered here necessarily because that's where we live. I'm not free to go traipsing all over the world to minister. I do travel the world, and I'm blessed to be able to minister in a lot of different places, but my marriage comes first. I have to protect my marriage first. There's an interdependence in marriage. 1 Corinthians 11 and 12 says, in the Lord, however, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. For as woman came from man, so also man is born of woman. But everything comes from God. We're not independent, yet too often we live independent lives. Husband's off doing his thing, wife's off doing her thing. We come together, perhaps we sleep together, perhaps we don't sleep together. We live lives, we're roommates. That's not God's plan, his intention for marriage. We are not independent, we're connected. Remember, marriage is representative of the nature of God. Unity, oneness, community. Living independent lives isn't going to represent God. We do have roles, however, and so husband and wife need to be together. The husband's role, he has a specific role given by God. Ephesians 5:25 says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. That's our role, to give of ourselves to our wives. What does that mean? What does that look like? The husband is the prophet. He's supposed to be the one that brings the truth, brings God's word to his family. And so he's also the priest, the one that leads his family into God's presence in prayer and worship. And he's the king, the protector and provider of his family. And so when I look at that, when I learn this, it's like, wow, that's huge. How can I do that? I can't do it except by the grace of God and God's empowerment. But this is the life of Christ. He was the prophet. He brought the truth to mankind. He was the priest. He led mankind into the presence of God. He protects his people. He provides for his people. Jesus is our role model as husbands in taking care of our family. Not just physically taking care of them, but spiritually taking care of them, emotionally taking care of them. That's the godly leader. What about the wife? Genesis 2:18 again says, Lord God said, it's not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. And that helper is not the maid. In fact, the Hebrew word for helper is ezer. And God the Father uses that same word for himself when he tells Israel, I will be your helper. I will be your strength, your strong right arm. So it's not someone to pick up the man's clothes. It's someone to strengthen him, empower him, again, to work as a partner in life, in a family, in meeting the challenges of life. The wife is to be the helper, the husband lover, child lover. She's the relationship-oriented nurturer. That's how God wired women, to nurture, to strengthen the family. And so when we look at that, when we put those two roles together, how well can we work together? What a strength we will have in a marriage relationship. You know, in Proverbs, 5 times Solomon wrote, it's better to be anywhere on the planet but in the room with a nagging woman, a contentious wife, on the roof, out in the desert. And you know, for years it bothered me. It's like, Lord, why? Probably in Proverbs more than any theme, and it talks about wisdom a lot, but something specific, I don't read anything 5 times in Proverbs. And I believe this year God gave me insight into that. It goes back to the fall. What happened with the fall? You know, God goes to the man because he's the leader. And so what does the man do? It's the woman you gave me. And so not only does he blame the woman, he blames God for giving him the woman. And then what does the woman do? Well, it was the snake's fault. And so we're blaming each other. It's okay. And so, but look at the consequences. The curse for the man is that by toil, by hard work, he's going to bring food. And so what happens is the man's identity becomes his job because of the fall. That's not the way God meant it to be, but because of the fall, man's identity has become his job. And what is the curse for the woman? 1, she's going to bear children in pain. 2, her desire is going to be for her husband, and he will rule over her. Because that's the curse. It's not meant to be. That's not God's proclamation the way it's supposed to be. And so what's happened with that, man's off doing his thing, and the woman's trying to get relationship. She's created more relational than him. So she's trying to get relationship with him to draw him into relationship. She becomes contentious. She becomes nagging. Why? Because he's not paying attention. How many times, I can't tell you how many times I have guys come to me and, you know, Satan's trying to destroy my marriage. My wife, I want to work on my marriage. Well, I start investigating their history. He's neglected her, hasn't given her any attention, hasn't met her needs for 10 years, 20 years, and she finally gave up and went somewhere else, and now he's saying Satan's trying to destroy my marriage. One guy called me up and said, Satan's trying to destroy my marriage. And for some reason I said, where are you? And he goes, well, I'm at a rehab center. And I said, why are you at a rehab center? Well, I have drug addiction and sex addiction problems. Going, you've done a good job of destroying your marriage. Satan hasn't needed to do anything. His wife gave up. Now, would I tell the wife not to give up? But too often, it's only after she walks away does God get his attention. And so what God revealed to me, this whole thing in Proverbs, it's not about the woman nagging. It's about the man not paying attention, not being in relationship, not living in oneness with his wife. And she's trying to get that because that's how she's created. And now she becomes contentious. Now she becomes nagging because when she stops, then that's the problem. And that's what we see in marriage or in counseling is when the wife doesn't care anymore, when she says, you know what, he can do whatever he wants, then I'm really worried. Because when it gets to apathy, then we've got a problem. My wife wants to say something.
I have to add something to that too, though, because in all fairness, there are women that are contentious, are nagging, are controlling, and want everything their way. There are times where the husband is doing all that he should be doing, being that godly role model and so forth. And sometimes the woman, it's just not enough for her. So in all fairness, sometimes it happens that way. But like Chris said, we were built for a relationship, and too often our mates are off doing their own thing and neglect us. But again, you have to remember there's got to be balance. There's got to be balance. And if you don't have that balance, then obviously you're off kilter and things aren't going to be going the way God intended them to be.
Exactly. See, I need my wife for balance. So what do? It's a matter of collaboration as a couple. And the collaboration is my new favorite word. And I define collaboration as working together as a team to resolve an issue or a problem or a conflict. And so in our instance here, in that collaboration, we want to work together as a couple. We want to resolve issues, resolve those conflicts. We want to meet the challenges we face as a couple, working as a team, not one person dictating this is what we're going to do. It's taking into account our differences. It's taking into account our abilities, our gifts, all of those things to resolve those issues we're going to face in life. It's a matter of fulfilling your role. Again, not pointing the finger at our spouse, but doing what we're called to do. Not, like Carmen pointed out, we don't want to point, women can't point the finger at her husband and say, well, you're neglecting me, so I'm not going to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to nag you and take care of it, get you to change because you need to change. She needs to fulfill her role. And if she's loving him and drawing him to God and to herself, it's going to be a lot easier pull than trying to nag him. And the husband the same way. Rather than telling her, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, it's doing what he's called to do. Jesus said, if you love me, you will obey me. And he did give commands, but it wasn't all the specific stuff of, well, you have to do this, this, and this, and this. It was about relationship. And so that's our model. It's living in that relationship, doing what we're supposed to do. It's loving our spouse unconditionally, not having conditions on the love. It's giving of ourselves. Again, what is love? Jesus Christ demonstrated what love is by giving himself for us. It's working together as a team. I may beat this thing to death, but it's a fact of life. That's what God created marriage for, to work together as a team, to meet challenges. In the garden, it was tending the garden together, working together. And even today, in all the challenges that we face, the challenges you will face as pastors, as leaders in the church, when you're going to meet those challenges better when you work together as a team. And it's a matter of utilizing your differences. We're going to talk more our next sessions about those differences, but there's differences that will help us in our marriage, in our family, and in our ministry. In everything we do, we can work better together as a team. We need to realize that ministry is not a career, it's a calling. And when we support one another and build each other up, we're going to fulfill that calling. And whether you're a vocational minister or you're ministering to people in your neighborhood, again, we need to work together as a team. We need to, that calling, like what Guy told me, many years ago, I wanted to be full-time ministry. And a friend sat me down and said, you know what, Chris, you're in full-time ministry. Minister where you're at. And so if we're a Christian, we're in full-time ministry. Now, we may have vocational ministry, like us in marriage ministry or as a pastor, but we're all full-time ministry. What has God called us to do? Where are we supposed to be ministering? Again, marriage requires work. 1 Corinthians 7:33, Paul admonishes, he says, a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife. And this comes from when he said, you know, I wish you were all like me, unencumbered, totally focused on the Lord. But a married man has to be concerned about the affairs of the world. And a married woman is concerned about the affairs of the world, how she can please her husband. And so we necessarily have to be concerned about our spouse. And some of that is worldly stuff. And so most of us are called to be married. I had a young man I was mentoring years ago, and he said, Chris, I don't think I'm called to be single. I said, really? Are you called to be celibate for life? And he said, I don't think I'm called to be married. And I said, really, are you called to be celibate for life? And he goes, oh, no. I said, well, then you're supposed to be married. And because we don't think like we should. Biblically, if we're not called and have that strong call to singleness, to serving God, totally sold out to Him like Paul, then Jesus' life, what He modeled, if we're not going to live a life like Jesus led, total walking from town to, well, maybe we don't walk, we may fly or drive, but if we're not totally sold out serving God, then we probably shouldn't be married. And so with this young man, it's like, well, yeah. And then he finally got serious about being open to finding a wife, and found a wonderful wife that they minister together now. And so we do have to be concerned about the things of the world. And again, the garden. You know, do we want this beautiful garden, or do we want the dried up, dead yard? We have to make the choice. And if we're going to have this beautiful garden of a marriage, it's going to take work. We have to choose to work on our marriage. I like this clock. Take time for your marriage. I'd like to make these things up, and I haven't found out how to do that. But to remind us that we have to take time for our marriage. You know, to get quality time, you have to have a quantity of time. We have this thing that we think, well, with our kids, I can carve out 15 minutes in a day or 30 minutes in a day, and we're going to have this quality time. Well, that doesn't always work. And I'm finding that out with grandkids. I have a grandson who's now 17, and I try to get quality time with him when I have some time. And he's got homework, he's got this going on, and sometimes he's just not interested. I need more quantity of time so that I can get some of that quality of time. And it's the same with our spouse. We have to have time together, not just carve out 15 minutes and say, okay, this is our quality time. What if we're tired or we're stressed or something going on, we may not get that quality time. So yeah, we do need to be focused about some quality time, but we're going to have some quantity too. We have to invest time. It's an investment. You guys are making an investment by giving up your Saturday to be here. And we appreciate that because I believe you're investing in your ministry and in your marriage. The other thing is being purposeful and deliberate. This is huge. We have to be purposeful about investing that time, taking the time for our marriage. So what is love? I've said it several times. First John 3:16 it gives us the answer. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ gave himself up for us, and we're to give ourselves up for our brothers. Who's our closest brother? Our husband, our wife. And so our spouse is that closest brother. We're to give of ourselves. But look at this quote. I love this quote by Ken Kingdon. He says, if you are looking for someone to meet your needs, make you happy, and make your life worthwhile, you will be greatly disappointed, quickly discouraged, and basically unhappy for the rest of your life. But if you will just be the person God has made you to be and find out how you can give your life to someone else by meeting their needs and making them happy, you will discover fulfillment, joy, and peace in ways you can't even imagine. Folks, this is the gospel. This is what Jesus lived out. He wasn't here to get his needs met. He didn't walk those dirty, dusty roads in Palestine to get his needs met and be taken care of and make his life worthwhile. He poured himself into people to the point of giving his life for us. And so when I'll tell you, this can change your life. It changed my life because I realized it's not about me. I was that selfish guy who, life was about me. Make me happy. Take care of me. And when living this, do I do it perfectly? No. But my goal is to give of myself for my wife, to meet her needs, to take care of her. Just like I talked about in the first session. If she's unhappy, what can I do? The part of the equation, I have to invest in my relationship. And so what do I need to do? Give her some time, meet her needs, take care of, speak her love language, a variety of things I can do to invest in our relationship that will bring the marital satisfaction up. But it's about me, not about her. So, and then it's loving your spouse by meeting his or her needs. That's what Ken Kingdon is talking about. And I believe that's what the gospel is about. The gospel is about giving. It's the good news that Jesus Christ died for us to give us eternal life, to reconcile us with God. So what are we to do? It's to give of ourselves, to reconcile people, to reconcile our spouse. Like Carmen said earlier, we are in the ministry of reconciliation if we're Christians. So what do I need to do to reconcile with my spouse? To be giving, to meet her needs, to take care of her. We have to take care of the home front. And those that aspire to leadership, I mean, this is for all of us, but it's for especially pastors and leaders. we have to take care of our home front first. The pastor leader's husband or wife, I'm assuming most of you are men out there, your wife and children, your husband and children, they have to see Christ in you. They need to see Christ, that forgiveness, that giving, that love in you. They need to know that they come first before the ministry. I just drew a blank on his name. A pastor in Portland wrote a book, Locking Arms, about men connecting with other men. And he told a story one time that Saturday evening, this woman called him up and said, "Pastor, I have to see you right now. My marriage is a shambles. I've got to see you." And he said, "Well, how long has this been going on for?" And she said, "Well, 10 years. And he said, "You have to see me right now on a Saturday night?" He was ready to go out into the rain, drive to the office, and meet with this woman, neglect his wife and his children. Stu Weber is his name. He was going to leave his family when this problem has been going on 10 years, and now all of a sudden it's a crisis. He said, "You know what, call the office Monday morning. I'll see you at the beginning of the week." And he stayed home. Your wife and children, your spouse and your children need to know that they come first.
And as Chris said about taking care of our home and our family, you know, if you're not taking care of them, you're not taking care of yourself. When you're not taking care of one another, and there's not that unity and peace at home, that's draining. You know, so you go to work, you go to minister to the church or your job or whatever you're involved in. You're drained emotionally, physically, spiritually. Everything's been sucked out of you because there's so much dissension and dysfunction at home. And then you try and go out and minister to those that are hurting. And it's ineffective. You're not effective if you're not taking care of this ministry first. So, you know, keep that in mind because it's so important. You need to have peace and unity between the two of you.
Yep. Amen. And finally, they need to know that they're loved, that you're willing to give of yourself to them. 1 Timothy 5:8 says, "If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." Wow, that's pretty strong words. And so we look at that often as physically providing for a family, providing housing, providing food. But I believe that because our God is relational, it's more than that. Remember, the husband's the prophet, priest, and king. It's not just taking care of them physically, it's taking care of them emotionally, spiritually, intellectually. It's our responsibility, guys. Remember what my African friend said. It's all our responsibility. And so the Bible points out that if we're not taking care of our home front, if we're not taking care of our family, we're worse than an unbeliever. It's like, well, I don't want to be labeled that way. And so our challenge to you is to, you know, despite the demands of ministry, make sure your family's a priority. Make sure your marriage is a priority. And we will give, next month when we talk about boundaries, we'll give some more practical things about that and what we can do to set healthy boundaries. But as you have your time of discussion, I encourage you to really look at where you're at in this. Are you taking care of that home front? And so we will see you after lunch for our next session. Thank you and God bless you.